Hey everybody, good morning. It's so good to be with you. My name is Justin, and I hope that you're having fun so far this morning. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever had a time where you scared your parents really, really bad? Like sometimes around our house, we do this thing where we hide around a corner and we jump out and we scare each other. Maybe you've done that. Or maybe there's been a time where they thought maybe they lost you or left you behind somewhere. I remember there one time, my aunt and uncle, we were all out as a family, bunch of us. There were like 25 of us at a mall. And we left, got all the way home, and my aunt and uncle realized that they had left their daughter at the mall all by herself. And she was probably, 11 years old, 12 years old. And so we were freaking out, and we were all afraid, and we went back, and she was sitting right there on the bench, and we picked her up. Maybe that's happened to you, maybe it hasn't, maybe you've heard stories. One of our favorite TV movies is Home Alone, and it happens in Home Alone. Maybe you remember that. But there was a time in Jesus' life, actually when he was 12 years old, that this same kind of thing happened between him and Mary and Joseph. And when he was a kid, Mary and Joseph, they would go to Jerusalem during the time of Passover. And every year they would do this. They would go to Jerusalem to celebrate Passover. And Passover was the time when the Israelites would go to Jerusalem and they would remember that God had delivered them from under the Egyptians, delivered them from slavery. And so when he was 12 years old, they went up to Jerusalem during the time of Passover to celebrate what God had done. And they got there, and they would travel in huge groups, huge packs with their families. And so they got to Jerusalem, they celebrated, they spent time there. And then Mary and Joseph and the rest of their family and the rest of their friends, they started their trek back home. And they traveled for a day before Mary started to think, I think we're missing something. And she was like, I wonder what it is. And Joseph said, I don't know. Maybe you forgot your bag. And she said, no, Jesus, we forgot Jesus. He's not here. So she starts running around the crowd and asking, has anybody seen Jesus? Have you seen Jesus? Is Jesus with you? Is Jesus with your kids? No one had seen him. So they turn around and they go back to Jerusalem as fast as they can. And they get back to Jerusalem and they're freaking out. And Jesus is hanging out in the temple. The temple would have been like our church. It was the place where all of the religious people would come together and they would have conversations about who God is, and they would have conversations about the scriptures. And Jesus was sitting in the temple, not waiting for Mary and Joseph to come back, not so that they would know where to find him, but he was there and he was having conversations. And Mary shows up and says, you freaked us out. You scared us. And Jesus said, Don't you know that this is exactly where I'm supposed to be? This is where I want to be, in the temple, having these conversations. It's interesting that sometimes we think of Jesus, and he was fully God, right? He was fully God. He came from heaven. He was God in flesh. And we think, maybe Jesus knew all of this stuff already. Right? He didn't need to study. He didn't need to go to school because he was God. He knew everything already. But that's not what we see when he was 12 years old. In fact, what we see when he was 12 years old was this kid, just like you, just like me, and he went to the temple to have conversations, to ask questions because he wanted to learn. He wanted to learn more about who God was, and he wanted to learn more about what God was doing in the world. He wanted to learn more about who God cared about and who God loved, and he wanted to study the scriptures. And so I'm wondering this morning if we understand that we have the same opportunity that Jesus had. That you and I, we don't know everything, right? We still have a lot to learn. You have a lot to learn. I have a lot to learn. And we have this amazing place where we come to One Life, and we learn about God, and we read the Bible, and we can ask questions. We can ask our huddle leader. We can ask them questions. We can ask Aaron questions. We can ask Miss Nicole questions. You could come to me and ask me questions. What a crazy, unbelievable opportunity we have. Just like Jesus, when he was in Jerusalem, he was growing in knowledge. He was learning. He had this hunger to know more about God. My prayer for you this morning is that you would have that kind of hunger, that you would be hungry for God. I know right now you probably want a snack, maybe some goldfish, that kind of hunger. But I want you to be hungry for more of God, to know more about God, to see how God is at work, to know what God is doing in your world, to know what God cares about and who God cares about. I want you to have that hunger. I want that kind of hunger. So this morning, as you break out and you go to your huddles, I want to encourage you to ask good questions. I want you to be hungry. I want you to not just ask questions about why is the sky blue? Okay, you can ask that. But I want you to ask questions about who God is and what God is doing and why God loves you and why God loves the world. I want you to think of one or two questions about who God is, and I want you to ask that question this morning because you're hungry for him. Just like Jesus at 12 years old was hungry to know more about God, I want you to want to know more about God. That's my prayer for you this morning. And so be like Jesus. Be like Jesus. You're in the temple. You're in the church. You're here in Kids Life. Start asking good questions. Listen. Put your ears on and listen. Use your eyes. Make eye contact with your huddle leader, with your teacher, and listen and want more of God. Because when we seek him, the Bible tells us this, when we seek him with our whole heart, with everything that we are, when we are hungry for him, he tells us this, that we will find him. That's a promise. That's a promise. When you seek him with your whole heart, when you are hungry for him with your whole being, he promises that you will find him. So go and ask really good questions this morning, just like Jesus did at 12 years old. Have a great time.